This presentation is brought to you by the Pacific Division Feeding Leadership. Several housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted tonight on YouTube. The link is in the email you received earlier. You should enter your own hours for this meeting of volunteer connection. Your mic and camera have been disabled. If you'd like your questions to be answered by our expert panelists, please enter them in the Q&A section. The chat scrolls too fast and we won't be able to catch your questions. And feel free to use the chat to say hi to each other. Please welcome back Mary and her team. And Mary, please take it away.
Sorry, I was on mute. Do you have the slide deck yet?
I do not.
Okay.
I will check right now. I
Okay,
think
check.
the email just came in.
Our main presenter, Michael Hernandez, just joined us. There was a little confusion on the time, but I'm going to go ahead and start. And the first thing I want to do, someone sent me a message last week. They've never seen me. So here you go. I'm going to take myself off. I don't have great lighting in my office, but hello, everyone. I'm so glad to see all of you. I guess I hadn't turned my camera on for the last two times. So someone said, is that really a picture of you? And while it is, it's not my current picture. That's about 10 years old. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera to save bandwidth. So as you all know, feeding is near and dear to my heart. And tonight we are fortunate to have a presenter who has years and years and years of experience in food safety. And primarily as a food safety inspector, I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about that. In addition to that, we have a new feeding manager who is joining us in the presentation, Lisa Baker, and I will let her tell you a little bit about her background when she comes on to help with this presentation. Now, all of you know so far, those of you that have joined us for two sessions before, I always like to either start or end with a food for thought. And the pun is intended. And I couldn't decide which one to do today, but I am going to do one that relates to food safety. And here's what it is. And think about this. The food you eat can either be the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. So as we hear the presentation tonight, one, think about which you would prefer your food to be, and two, how you can use the information that we're going to share tonight to make sure it's the former, not the latter. So at that point, let me give it over to Michael. Would you take it away, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. A little bit of technical difficulties. Good evening. My name is Michael Hernandez. Yowie, did you get the slide deck?
Yes, I just did. I'm going to pull up right now. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Michael Hernandez. My co-presenter will be Lisa Baker, and I'll have her introduce herself. I'm the feeding lead for Sacramento, and I've been doing it for about 7 years. I've deployed on several DRs and had an opportunity to work both at the management as well as the supervisory level. But my background is in food safety as a professional, so it's something that's, as Mary has said, is something that's near and dear to me. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some information that you can use from our experience, and I'll turn it over to Lisa momentarily.
Hello, everyone. I am actually a respiratory therapist, and I worked for Kaiser for 22 years and retired. And after I retired, I needed to keep myself busy, and so I became a Red Cross volunteer. I've been on quite a few DRs, and I'm working locally in feeding, trying to get mostly some coordination with some of the restaurants in the area to provide meals in case we need a shelter.
Thank you,
Okay,
Iwe.
well, let us begin. Most of you, if not all of you, have taken the appropriate food safety trainings required by Red Cross. This is clearly going to be an overview, and I think it's great that we have these trainings or workshops because it's a lot of information out there. So, and we can build from each other's experiences. So I welcome you all. And next slide, please. I added this slide because it reminded me of a shelter that I was working in, and was on the serving line, and it just so happened that they had sent us these big gallons of chocolate milk. So in order for the people to get the drink, I had to serve it. And this kid about this same age came up to me, asked me for some chocolate milk, which, I served to him, gave to him, and he was really happy. And he walked away, and literally, probably about a minute or a minute and a half later, he came back and he asked for more. And I said, well, sure. And so I gave him some more. And he came back a third time. And it just reminded me for people in the shelter, and in particular this kid, that glass of chocolate milk was probably the most important thing in his life at that moment. And it's one thing about feeding, for those of you who've been in shelters, people there, they actually don't want to be there. They're there because they have to be there. And they're worried. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their routines. They're worried about their families, their homes. And it's a very stressful place. And even though they're not prisoners, they're basically confined to the shelter. And it just reminds me that every time the food arrives, the mood just changes. People just wait for it. As a matter of fact, they're lining up before we're even ready to get, we're staging things and people are lining up because it is really an important part of their psychological healing and their nutritional needs. So I've always thought that feeding had a very, very special place amongst the core values of Red Cross, which are sheltering, comfort, and feeding. And so that's why I have that picture. That kid looked very much like him. Next slide, please. So you should have taken some food safety training, certainly the feeding fundamentals. And we used to have an online food safety course. I believe it's now in EDGE or whatever it's called now, OneSource. It's been a while since I've taken it. So, and I will tell you, as a food safety professional, those trainings are very, very good. But I will also tell you that you can lose the forest for the trees. There is a lot of information in there. And if you're not doing it regularly, you can lose some of that information. I know when I'm a DAT responder, and if I go for 2 or 3 months without doing it, I have to kind of go through a cheat sheet and say, okay, what's next? What's next? How do I log on to RC Care and RC Respond, all that stuff. So certainly it's a great foundation, but having these ongoing types of refresher courses is really, really important. Keeping in mind that supervisors and managers, it's their job also to make sure people are complying with the appropriate public health rules regarding feeding, as well as the Red Cross standards for feeding. But each of us really has a responsibility to understand and know what we're supposed to be doing. Next slide, please. So the rules of the game, I call this. Red Cross didn't invent these things. Red Cross policies and procedures are consistent with general public health principles enforced by state and local governments. And so you have to be aware of that. At any time, an inspector can come in to view what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it. And if you're not familiar with what they're going to be looking for, or if you need a refresher, this one happens to be Sacramento County, but all environmental health, practically all county health departments, or environmental health as they're called, have very similar guides, whether it be in Oregon, Washington, in Alaska, certainly here in California. They do have food safety inspection guides, and they also have a checklist. So if you need a little refresher, it doesn't hurt to have it. And so if you are able to, I would recommend that you do search out these documents. Certainly your supervisors and managers should have it. And if you don't have one in your particular county, you can go to the CDC or any other county within your state and see if they have a similar type checklist. I will say that one time I was inspected, and we brought in all of our stuff, obviously, because we were in another facility, including our hand wash soap. And so he came in, and at the sink provided by the hand wash sink provided by the facility, the soap was depleted. There was no soap in it. So he wrote us, even though I brought our own, he did cite me for not having soap in the hand wash dispenser at the hand wash sink, which it was a little bit nitpicky, but the point is that they will come in and take a look at what we're doing. Next slide, I'm sorry. So the CDC and FDA have identified the major causes of foodborne illness. You can obviously read them, but it's personal hygiene, unsafe food, improper cooking, improper thawing, cross-contamination, cross-contact, and time temperature abuse. Next slide. As Red Cross feeders, we typically are not going to be too concerned about improper cooking, improper thawing, because we're getting it from either partners and or local certified restaurants. So we're relying on them to have properly done those particular activities. Since we don't do any cooking, we should be doing very little, if any, cutting of fruits and things like that. That's just isn't preparation isn't something that we should be doing in any form. Food from unsafe sources is a bit of a misnomer, because we do get from time to time restaurants will come to the shelter and say, hey, you know what, I want to donate some food. Well, the food may very well be safe, but it's not an approved source if it hasn't gone through the process of it being vetted through management or through the doc. And so we shouldn't be accepting food just from people who are driving up. Certainly someone making it in the kitchen, but even if it's a restaurant, we have no way of verifying who they are, what they're doing, how they did it. So there's a process for that. So for that one, I would say approved sources rather than unsafe sources. So we're going to go through each of the other 3 items in a little bit more detail and talk about each of those. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Hi, personal hygiene for the clients and for ourselves is very important. Wellness and injury, that we don't come in there when we have a cough, a temperature. To be careful if you have any open wounds. One of the biggest things I think is hand washing. Washing your hands for at least 20 seconds and doing the front, the back. And when you washing your hands, you should use a paper towel or a dryer. And then when you use gloves also, when you change your gloves, which you should do often if they are soiled, that you should wash your hands in between that. And one of the big things that I just learned about is our outer garments, that we shouldn't be wearing our Red Cross vest if we're wearing it to the restroom, outside, and things like that. If you do have to wear it, then we should have either a clean apron or a plastic apron to put over it, ideally, and to wear shorter sleeves. That way you can wash your wrists along with your hands. The next one, oh, storing your personal items. We shouldn't have them anywhere where we're serving the food or close to any of the food. Hopefully we have some place to store our items like a locker room or something like that. And then our hair coverings are a big concern. Um, you, we supply hair nets. You can wear your cap and have your hair tied up, or you can use a scrub cap, which I use when I go out, just because I have lots of them from when I was working as a respiratory therapist. With the jewelry, please keep it to a minimum. Maybe your wedding ring. Um, Never wear anything, an earring or a necklace that you feel could fall off and get into the food. And the next one is lotions and creams, which we shouldn't have on, I mean, um, due to the scents, somebody can be actually have allergies to scents and things like that. And then here in California, you can't smoke within 20 feet of a building. But a lot of times when you do have a shelter, they have a designated area for that, and they need to go there, everyone. When it comes to eating, when you eat, you shouldn't be eating anything when you're on the line or drinking. Um, please try and drink water before you come. And then if you're going to eat, please go back where you're not eating on the line. It's back to you, Michael.
Hey,
Okay, if I
Michael,
could make just,
Michael,
if I could make
before you
just a
before
quick
you go
comment.
on, let me just insert here regarding to smoking, eating, but it's also the drinking, because I know I try and remind people that on the DR, it's normally a 12-hour shift. You need to stay hydrated. You need to keep yourself healthy by eating and drinking appropriately. But and this bullet could say smoking, eating, or drinking. It is not at all acceptable to be drinking water, either from your personal water bottle or from a water bottle that, came in from the Red Cross that they're handing out while you are serving food. So, Lisa did a mention to it, hydrate before you start serving food, before you get on the service line, or step away from it. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people dribble water when they're drinking down over food that they're serving. So this is kind of one of my bugaboos, along with the wearing your vests while you're serving food, and then wearing it into the restroom, and then coming back and serving food again. The plastic aprons are so inexpensive. They're as cheap as the gloves. We need to get them in your feeding kits and use them. It is critical. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Yeah, I'd like to also make a comment about the wellness and injury. One of the things that supervisors are hopefully trained to do is to observe individuals if they're sniffling, if they're coughing, if they seem to be going to the restroom a lot, washing their hands a lot, and have any signs that they might be ill. And if you're feeling ill in any way, you can still possibly be redirected to another activity. But we wouldn't want that to be on the food service line or in handling food. So you need to be careful that if you're just not feeling well, you don't know whether or not it's a transmittable disease or not. And a lot of illnesses have short, some have longer incubation periods before symptoms actually show up. So you always need to be aware of that. You all are probably aware of the precautions that we had regarding COVID and even now flu, but lesser known are things such as E. coli and Salmonella or staph. Staph comes from hair is a big source of staph infection. Norovirus, which is really big. You've all heard about cruise ships that have had thousands of people that get sick from norovirus. There have been 2 norovirus outbreaks within shelters, one in Pasadena and one here in Northern California. And it's unclear whether food was the source or the food worker was the source, but it's a incredibly virulent and easily transmittable virus. So your personal habits and hygiene are really, really important. The important thing to remember is these individuals that are in shelter are under a great deal of stress. As mentioned before, they're away from their homes and they have lots of worries. And stress has an effect on the immune system. Most of us, we're healthy. We can eat something that's partially contaminated or may have something in it, but our bodies can certainly fight it off. But if our immune systems are compromised in any way because of some underlying health condition or because we're under stress, then that can mitigate any kind of response that you have. So some of these may seem a little over the top, but they're all very, very important. And supervisors should be alert to all of these things and make sure that everybody is adhering to proper hygienic practices. Next slide. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about cross-contamination and cross-contact. Cross-contamination is when a food or a food contact surface, such as a utensil or some other kind of food vessel, gets in contact with an unclean surface, whether it be filth, it could be bacteria, it could be a virus, whatever, that could cause harm. So that's what cross-contamination is. It could also be from sanitizers. If you're spraying a sanitizer on the counter and there happens to be some exposed food, that could be a cross-contamination. Cross-contact is a very specific type of cross-contamination. It's a chemical contamination, but it's from allergens. Allergens are considered to be chemicals for the purposes of food safety. So we have to always be aware of allergen cross-contact, either through the air or by touching something. So those things all need to be accounted for. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. Obviously, if we're dispensing out food that is packaged, if I'm handing out wrapped Kentucky Fried Chicken lunches in boxes, the exposure potential is fairly minimum. But if you're dealing with a bulk food or if you're dealing with an unwrapped food, the exposure is there. You need to be aware of all of these things relative to the safety of that particular food. We've talked about our personal actions as far as hygiene, but also things like, rubbing your nose, touching your apron inadvertently, any of those things on your glove, just change your glove. The Red Cross has a warehouse full of gloves. There's nothing wrong with changing your gloves many, many times. Anytime it could potentially get contaminated, you should change that glove out. Again, gloved hands. One of the more interesting things that when I was a young field inspector, we used to have a saying, and that was, all gloved hands do is keep your hands from getting dirty, because many, many people get a false sense of security with gloves. And I'm sure all of you have been to places, certain sandwich shops where the person is making your sandwich, going over to the register, going over to the little toaster oven where they're toasted your bread. They're touching everything. They're touching money because they think they're wearing gloves. Everything is going to be protected. So you need to be conscious of those things. And again, a good supervisor is going to be watching for that sort of things. I have my own habits. I've been told a couple of things. Oh, Mike, hey, you touched your jeans with your glove. Darn it. It's just inadvertent, but we all have our habits and we all need to be very conscious of it. And obviously, placing a food serving equipment, whether it be a bowl or any a utensil, and putting it on an unclean surface, those all have to be monitored. When you're serving, how do you protect that serving implement while you're serving from a bulk container? All those things need to be considered when you're on the serving line. Next slide. Okay, well, they have out there professional sanitizing agents for most of us. And when I've been in shelters, all I get is a bunch of bleach. So you need to know how to make a proper sanitizing solution. Let's talk about how to properly clean a food contact surface, whether it be a bowl, some kind of equipment, a Cambro, a serving utensil. The first thing you need to do is you need to rinse it, preferably with warm water. Then you wash it with soap, and then you rinse it, and then finally you sanitize it, and then have it air dry. That's the proper way to clean and sanitize a food contact surface. For non-food contact surfaces, if you can, use soap and water, and then you can put sanitizing spray on it, such as tables, countertops, such as that. But if you don't have a professional sanitizer, you're going to have to make something out of bleach. And this is the typical formula. It's 1 tablespoon or a capful. They designed those capfuls to be a tablespoon to 1 gallon of water. And then that will get you to the proper concentration. I won't bore you with the parts per million, but it's 100 to 200 parts per million as a proper sanitizing for food contact surfaces. Just as a caveat, if you happen to go to like the Dollar Tree or some of these places, they do sell bleach. But the concentration of chloride in that is probably less than 5.25. So just be aware of that. But if you're getting high quality Purex or Clorox bleach, which we typically get, then this should be more than appropriate for it.
Okay, Michael, before you move on, before you move that slide. So one of the things that Mike said that I want to highlight that isn't on the slide is that the air drying of sanitized utensils. I was in a shelter recently and they had washed, they had rinsed, washed, rinsed, and sanitized the utensils. And then they picked up a dish towel and started to wipe it. They just put all kinds of germs back on the utensil. So that's something to keep in mind, that you have a clean space that you can set your utensils, especially now since we're doing more bulk feeding and less individually packaged meals. So air dry, air dry, air dry, and air dry on a clean surface that Michael talked about. So yes, I know at home, a lot of times we use our dish towels to wipe things off. Please don't do that. You've just erased all of your hard work. Thanks, Mike.
Sure. Next slide. Okay, all of you have heard of the rule of 4, and it has to do with temperature control of the food. And the way that Red Cross has stated it, it's an alliteration between 40 degrees and 140 degrees for 4 hours or forget it. So what does that mean? Next slide. There you go. So food is safely maintained below 40 degrees, which is refrigeration temperature, because bacteria grow very slowly. And it's maintained safe above 140 degrees. That's why we cook things. However, between 40 and 140 is when bacteria just grow amazingly fast. And that's why that 40 to 140 is considered the danger zone. And so it says 40 to 140 for 4 hours or forget it. So if your food has been above 40 and below 140 for a period of 4 hours, then you need to throw it out. So some of you can kind of maybe relate to if you're baking and you put yeast, there's a temperature. It's what, 90, 80, 90 degrees is the optimal temperature for yeast to kind of bloom and get ready and activate. It's within that danger zone, right? Because that particular food loves that temperature. And so that's really a good visual if you can think about it. All bacteria in that area, or most bacteria, I can't say all, most will proliferate very, very rapidly in that time zone. So that's the reason why they have that there. Next slide. One other thing I apologize, I've forgotten. So if you've got a food and you have been monitoring the temperature and you know it's been above 40 and you're approaching two hours, 3 hours, oh, you're getting close to 4 hours. Okay. Hey, you know what? I'm going to donate to a food shelter. That ain't going to work. We can't give them something that's going to be contaminated within a short period of time. If you're going to have extra food and you intend on donating to a shelter, you have to account for that 4-hour period. And then you need to let them know that, you know, hey, we've had this here for 3 hours between 40 and 140. You've got an hour left for it to be safely served. If you cannot do that, then you're going to need to throw it away. Next slide. So this is a standard labeling that goes on a Cambro. And this is from the Southern Baptist, if you recognize their logo there. And typically these would go on a Cambro when a IRV goes to pick up food. And what it does, it says, okay, what time is it? What temperature is it? And then it gives you an opportunity to every hour to take another temperature. These are really, really valuable. If you don't have access to these, they are available on one source. You can print them out, but they're on paper. They're not self-adhesive. So you're going to have to find a way to affix it to a Cambro. At minimum, you're going to have to give this to the person who's going to receive the food and ask them to fill out what is the temperature at the time of pickup. That involves a couple of things. Number one, you have to have something for them to write on. And number two, they have to have a thermometer. And it's my understanding that I've heard lots of stories that people have been in feeding operations and they never once saw a thermometer. So we need to make sure we have thermometers out there. And if you don't have this kind of label, then you have to have some kind of chart or something that you can document this stuff so you can keep track. And you need to monitor the temperatures frequently. Obviously, if it's in a Cambro and you're kind of opening and closing it intermittently, those things are very, very well insulated. They hold the temperature very, very well. But the more you open it, the more any food is exposed to ambient temperature, the quicker it's going to cool off. So that may mean you may have to take the temperature a little bit more frequently. But we're very strict about that 4-hour rule. And so hopefully you'll be able to adhere to that. Next slide. Okay, meal considerations. As the statement says, meals must meet the cultural, religious, and dietary needs of the affected individuals. That includes infants, children. That's sometimes can be a challenge. We certainly within the first 24 to 48 hours are at the mercy of our local supplies and resources. If you're in a remote area in Alaska or in Washington or in California or out in the desert, there may not be a whole lot of services where you can get the foods that are necessary. But to the extent that we can, we certainly try to meet the request as much as possible. So we're going to talk about some of those. We all should be aware of what the components of a Red Cross meal relative to the protein, to the starch, vegetable, and drink. And if we're not, it's on the webpage. And if you're not even sure of that, then you can use a spoodle. Those things that are in the IRV, that every IRV is equipped with a spoodle that has the serving sizes already calibrated for you in those little spoons. So you can always meet that. I find that when we go to local vendors, the food portions are usually pretty large and may not always meet our desired for nutrition and or for amount. But what I try to do is sometimes I try to get the senior meals. Senior meals typically are smaller than the normal dinner meals. They typically are more aligned with our feeding sizes as well as nutritional. Typically, older individuals use the senior meals, so they have a vegetable, they have a protein, they have a starch, and they typically may have applesauce or something to go with it. It makes it a little bit easier if you're using local restaurants to try and meet that using that way of doing it. Otherwise, we just have to use what we can. Obviously, there are cultural and personal preferences that people are going to have. To the extent that we can meet those needs, we need to try to do it. Some people may only like Asian food or Mexican food or Mediterranean food. If it's possible, fine. But it may not be possible given the considerations that we have in a shelter. People may have certain food restrictions, whether they be religious, such as halal or kosher, or they may be diabetic. They may need low salt, and all of those things need to be accounted for. Typically, and hopefully, there's some communication between the registration individuals, DHS, and feeding so that we're aware of what those are. I've found in many cases that system does tend to break down. We have a thing called SKIA that apparently feeding individuals have access to, and I forget what SKIA stands for. So Mary, can you remind me what SKIA stands for? Yahweh, do you know?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was on another planet. SKIA stands for Shelter Client Information App. Is that right? I think that's right.
That's it. I believe it is. So that's what they use when they do the intake and the registration. So that's always a backup. But personally, I'd rather get it from DHS. That way, I can ask questions about it. Keeping in mind that with halal and possibly even with the kosher, there may be also restrictions relative to the timing of the eating because of their what do you call it? Not abstinence, the other one. The anybody remember what it's called? Well, they have periods of time where they can't eat because
Ramadan.
I'm sorry to hear what?
Ramadan.
Right, but there's a term for that period, and all I can come up with is abstinence, but that's not it.
Fasting?
Fasting. There you go. Thank you. Fasting. So you may have to adjust your time schedules based upon their religious needs. Access and functional needs. Well, certainly that relates to people in wheelchairs, people with mobility issues. Those types of things, we're going to have to account for those in a physical sense. But there are people who may need soft foods. There may be people who may need to have thickening agents. There are all kinds of things that may come up when you're dealing with the general population. Again, hopefully DHS and or some other means we get that information so we can try and accommodate them. There are individuals who may come in who may need to be fed. It's not required that Red Cross feed those people. We don't have the training for that. Even if we want to be nice with them, typically they will come with a caretaker. That should be the case, but I can't think of an instance where we would need to actually feed individuals. Again, knowing what's in food and what people may object to. If you can, try and find out from the menus, from your own general cooking, what might be in a particular cutlet, what might be in a stroganoff, what might be in spaghetti sauce, in case someone asks, because people do come on, hey, is there cilantro in in this taco? Is there sugar? Is there some other thing that might be objectionable to them? And knowing that is really important, especially obviously when it comes to people with allergies. To the extent that you can find that stuff out, it's really, really helpful. When you go pick up the food, you can also have the person who picks it up ask, are there any allergens in these foods? Just so that we have it accounted for. So trying to figure that stuff out can sometimes be a challenge, but certainly the consequences for at least not trying it could be significant. There's a story here in Sacramento, I'll just briefly say, Camp Sacramento, which is up in the mountains, and they were providing lunches to the kids for the day camp. And the parents of a child had reported a peanut allergy. They knew about it. Everybody knew about it. They ordered some cupcakes from a local bakery. They did not know they put a pinch of peanut butter in the chocolate to give it some flavor. And unfortunately, the girl did not survive. In those cases, you're just not going to know. But to the extent that you can find out, it's really important. If you know someone has a peanut allergy, it's even more important that you do it. Others will get sick, but peanut allergies can be fatal. And then lastly, allergies. Next slide. These are the identified allergens by FDA and CDC. There's a significant number of people that have allergies to all of these things. There was a new one added just about a year ago. That would be sesame. I didn't realize it was an allergen because I really like sesame seeds. But all of these can be problems for individuals. And certainly fish. There's a lot of people I know of that can break out in hives with fish. But peanuts are really the killer. And those are ones that we need to really be aware of most judiciously. So,
Mike, before you go on, so here's a thought for all of us on this call, on this training. Those last two slides, there's a lot of information to remember. So what I'm going to recommend to all of you feeding SAs, shelter SAs, everyone here on the call, as soon as a client mentions to you that they have a religious or cultural or medical issue around food, whether it's an allergy or something like Mike described culturally, like they need kosher food, to be a great SA, the first thing you do is turn around and you tell your supervisor, because it's going to be the supervisor's responsibility to make sure those needs are met. We don't expect you as a feeding SA to somehow conjure, a gluten-free sandwich for a person or any gluten-free lunch for a person. That'll be the responsibility of either the headquarters feeding manager, if it's large enough, or the feeding supervisor. So remember, I know it's a lot of information and a lot of things to keep in the forefront, and those two slides are really good to keep handy when you're going to deploy. When you hear that from a client, immediately let the supervisor know, because they may not have had a chance to see it in SCIA yet, or have had a chance to talk to health services. And we can accommodate those individuals.
Mary?
Yes?
Another item that I'd like to say is that unfortunately, SAs are thrown into supervisory positions just because of need. So SAs still need to kind of be aware of that, certainly supervisors. And for the supervisors out there and managers, one other thing that you may want to consider, we may not immediately know what would be appropriate for a particular client, whether it be religious, cultural, or medically need, but we can always ask them, okay, we don't have a halal, we don't have a kosher, we don't have, we're not prepared for a soft food. I'm going to the store, what can you eat? If you were going to go buy something, what can we purchase for you? They know what they can eat. And even if we don't have that medical background, they know what their daily diet consists of. And that's a way that we might be able to accommodate their needs in a better way.
And since you bring up that wonderful point that SAs often or can be field promoted to supervisors, we have a 4-part series that follows this series for all of those feeding SAs or shelter SAs that want to be feeding supervisors and think they have the capacity to do that. We're going to have more information in our next 2 classes, but we would love to have you join those supervisor series. So thank you for mentioning that, Mike.
You're welcome. Next slide. Okay, this is the closeout. I want to thank everybody. I think at this point, I think we're going to be open to questions. And Yelly, do you want to handle that, or you want to have, are people raising their hand? How do you want that handled?
Thank you, Michael. I will take it from here, and my name is going to be pronounced Yi-Wei. So think of leeway as in give me some leeway and replace the L with a Y and you get Yi-Wei. Or if you think of freeway, you take off the free and you get Yi-Wei. Okay, so let's go to, and by now my name has been pronounced many different ways and many different spellings, and I'm on a DR, and now I no longer know how to spell my own name because I start typing my name wrong. So, okay, anyways, thank you so much. We'll go to questions. Judy M, I see your hand has been up for a while. Do you have a question that you'd like to come off mute to ask?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I returned from North Carolina, and a lot of what you're telling here didn't apply at all. We had 21 herbs. The church was cooking for us, so we had no idea what was in it. We had no supervisors on board. We had an herb driver and yourself. We were in remote places. People would come up and say, well, what is it? And we'd try to tell them, but we didn't really know what was in it. And most of them would say, oh, I better not. Or they're pretty careful about what they can eat. But we were always in remote places. There's no supervisor with you. There's no tag on it that says what time it was cooked, how hot it was. And, you know, most of what you're saying here didn't apply.
Okay, so let me go ahead and take that. First of all, good news for you. On session number 5, April 9th, is when we're talking about the exact scenario that you got yourself into. The Southern Baptist Kitchen, where you're delivering food through the herbs, you're doing community feeding. Some of the things you mentioned should have happened, but we're going to spend the whole session just on working in a kitchen, in the field kitchen, like picking up the food and delivering it. Let me just say that this particular training was specifically designed for the Pacific Division. We do things, as you have experienced, very different than they do things back east. Very rarely do we run large kitchens. We do on occasion do the community feeding out of the herbs, but that's far less than they do in the South and in the East. So this was particularly designed for people that are doing feeding in the Pacific Division. Now, there are variations in all of the different regions. Alaska's a little bit different than California. Hawaii is very different than Oregon. And certainly Guam and the Mariana Islands is different. So everything is going to be slightly different, but it is really focused on what we do around feeding, which is generally vendor-based, not kitchen-based. Now, that being said, let me do say that on several mid-size 2s, 3s, and 4s, we do use the California Southern Baptist Organization, which is a little bit different than the National Southern Baptist Organization. And they can come in and cook out of, they have a mobile kitchen, but it's usually for smaller, it's not for the thousands of people that they are cooking for back east for like a hurricane, or in the Midwest for a tornado. So hopefully you're not disappointed, Judy. And I'm sorry your experience wasn't a stellar experience, but I bet you got some good insights into how things could be done better next time.
Well, I enjoyed the whole experience. It wasn't a bad experience, but you sometimes are completely on your own, and you have to be aware of, how to do it by yourselves. But no, I learned a lot. And one other thing I want to say is about the Cambros. One thing we learned, at first we were opening them up and opening opening the plastic so that it was always open. And we learned very quickly to keep that plastic closed until you're actually serving, because that holds the heat in. There's two layers. There's the Cambro and then a huge plastic bag. That's
Great.
really important.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Before we go to the next question, Iwe, I do want to, and I know it wasn't a question, but it was comments put in the chat 2 different times, and I need to address it. Probably the single most unsafe thing you can do, and I'm underlining unsafe, is to put bottles of water in ice chests with ice and let people serve themselves. One of our panel experts who put in the chat, they were actually know that a norovirus outbreak in Northern California was traced to the ice coolers, where people were allowed to reach their hand in and pull their own ice water out. There is really no need to ice our water. Room temperature water is more hydrating than ice water. Yes, sometimes when it's really hot, we like the feel of that. But if you really want to hydrate, you want water at room temperature. You hydrate better, you hydrate faster, and you save yourself a lot of headache with potential transmission of viruses. Back to you, Iwe.
Thank you, Mary. So we'll go to the question in the chat first before we go to Pamela. The question is a touchless laser thermometer good enough for temperature checks?
Mike, I'm going to let you answer that question. I've not used a touchless thermometer.
Touchless. I would say because it gives surface temperature, correct? We don't know what the internal temperature is. And so I would advise against it.
Thank you. Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I concur.
Great. Another question in the chat is, does the Salvation Army feed for disasters in the Los Angeles County?
Yes. They actually were feeding on the LA wildfires.
Thank you so much. And next question, I believe it's Pamela's question. Pamela, you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. I had worked this was my first time. I'm a new volunteer, and I had worked in a canteen. And I wish I had taken this course before I worked in that canteen, because I broke every rule that was spoken of in this course. And I didn't do it by myself, because I was offered. And I'm like, you sure? Oh yeah, we're sure.
Okay,
But
Pam.
if I would have taken this course, I would have known better, because it was like I was on my own. So I do agree with the lady before me. Well, I think it was Miss Judy.
Yes. Well, Pam, first of all, I'm welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're a newcomer to us. And now you have some pearls of wisdom that you can take back and share with other volunteers and colleagues the next time you end up on doing canteening. I won't ask you where it was, unless you want to tell me secretly offline.
No, no,
Because,
I didn't have any chances, and I won't do that. But I
okay,
will do by example next time.
awesome. Thank you,
Thank
Pam.
you.
Thank you, Pamela, for joining us for the first time. And for everyone that is your first time joining our series, there is a YouTube channel for our Pacific Division that you're able to see all the past sessions we did. There are hundreds of videos on there. If you go onto YouTube and search Pacific Division Red Cross, you'll see all the videos there. And it's the same link that was sent out earlier in the email. I didn't really see any other questions. I didn't see any questions in the Q&A. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I did see several recommendations from Julie and Deb. Mary, do you want any of them to come off mute to share their expertise on their apps?
Absolutely. We have a couple minutes, and I do want to highlight because I think I'm not sure who put it in there about the allergies, sesame, specifically sesame and allergens. Yes, Panda Express, which is a feeding partner with the Red Cross that donates up to 100 free meals for shelters. They are not, they say right away, they are not allergen free. They use a lot of products like sesame and peanut oil and things with gluten in them and whey. So just be careful when you're using that. It's certainly okay to do it, but then have something for your medical or cultural diets that are needed. Okay, so go with Julia and Deborah, please.
I guess if
I
Julia
just got,
doesn't come off right now, are
oh,
you
go ahead.
Julia? Are you?
It just took me a while to get off of mute.
Julia had put in the chat, and it's an app I also have, which is Religions and Disasters. And as she also can tell you, if you're in a situation where you do need to know what the feeding needs are and different things like that, there is an app also available. And Julia, do you want to mention something also on that?
Well, I just go by that one. It's an app that you can download. It's Religion and Disaster, but there's also a FEMA course that talks about churches in disaster. So it goes more into the areas of what each national church organization does, like the Methodist does casework and the Baptists do feeding and the laundry and shower trailers. Church of the Brethren does children traumatized by disaster. So they all pick a different area. So it's an interesting class to take. But the other app is good to try and understand or know what meals you want to serve. But there is stuff on OneSource as well that you can look up on what types of foods you can feed that are halal or whatever you may need religion wise. And again, it doesn't hurt to ask the client, what kind of things do we definitely need to stay away from, and what do you choose to eat?
Which is great on that. The only other thing, Mary, that I put in the chat that I am going to actually, and I know Vicki has experience with me on that, and half a dozen people. I have an allergy, and it's a sulfite. If people can't tell me what's in the food that isn't going to include, I can't eat. So I mean, this is how important it is to me personally, and so think of it as far as how important it is for our clients. So that's just my throwing in there on that one. So thank you,
Deb.
guys.
Deb, that yeah, I can't agree more. That's so important, and it's honestly easy for us to do. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of extra work, but we can do that. We can accommodate those people. Back to you, Iwe.
Thank you. So Cynthia just posted in the chat the screenshot of the app. And let's go ahead and take one more question. I think is from Charles. Let me go ahead and have you come off mute.
There we go. You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My question was, the Pacific divisions is different from the other divisions, and you say they have different shouldn't we be in a unified system where everybody does the same thing no matter where we are at?
Well, Charles, I would say that the needs are different in different areas. So if one thing I could say to anyone who's going to work disasters for the Red Cross is you need to be flexible, because things are going to be different based on where you are and based on the situation. You know, after this disaster, do you still have power? After this disaster, do you still have safe water?
About the food, I mean, safety. Food safety should be the same all across the board, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, this if there was there should be a unified system in a basic
in basic food
service.
safety. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, and there is a 20-minute video in Edge that is wonderful. I highly recommend everybody watch it. I watch it probably at least once a year, just kind of for refresher. It is very good. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point. Again, it is Red Cross, and it's across the board for everyone.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And we are back to you, Iwe.
Thank you also very much. Cynthia helped answer the question in the chat that it is okay to put your samples out so people know what we're going to give out. So thank you all so much for attending. We'll see you next week, same time, same channel. See you next week. Bye, everyone.
And before
Yes,
wait, Iwe, before everyone hangs up, I want to thank
Yes.
Iwe for all of the work she does on that and giving us reminders on that. So a thumbs up or clapping hands, if you will, for Iwe. Thank you, Iwe.
Thank you so much. And I will see you next week. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.